So moved.
From the Finance Committee, thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Mr. President, before us is also PCR 123-21, resolution relative to the ratification of the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Warwick and Island Council 94, Local 1651, for the period of July 1, 2021 and June 30th, 2024. I'd like to take a motion from the Finance Committee to move for public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion, I have a second, all in favor? Aye. Thank you, Mr. President.
Good evening, everyone. I call the City of Council special meeting for September 28th, 2001 to order. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. McAllister?
Here.
Mr. Foley? Mr. Gebhardt?
Here.
Mr. Howe?
Here.
Mr. Lattiser? Mr. McElroy?
Here.
Mr. Ricks?
Here.
Mr. Snappy? Ms. Travis?
Here.
9 present.
Thank you very much. At this time, will you please rise, and Councilman Howe will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the balls bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet
Again, good evening, everyone, and welcome. At this time, on the agenda is for executive communications. There are none. Under general communications, I would like to just take this time to outline the process that is taking place here this evening. We will have comments on both contracts. If the members of public would like to speak on that, we have our Sergeant of Arms is here, and at the time when it is announced for the members of the public to come up, he will escort you up to this podium here, and you just have to identify yourself and let us hear your thoughts on the two items that are up for debate this evening. So the process for tonight is very simple in the process part of it, because it is either an up or down vote on these two contracts that are being presented to the City Council. The way that the charter is set up is the administration negotiates with the union. They come to an agreement. The union votes on it as well. Once that is signed, there's a tentative agreement, and then that comes to the City Council for ratification. So that is what we are here to up or down vote whether to ratify the contract or not. So members of the City Council were not in the negotiations for either of these contracts. Members of the City Council received this information, and we are voting up or down on the contract. City Council members cannot change anything that is in the contract. They cannot make amendments to the contract. They cannot change the terms of the contract. They cannot change a comma of the contract. So what will be asked this evening is an up or down vote on to ratify the contract or not. Also, per the way the rules are set up, if this contract were not to be ratified, it does not go back into negotiations between the administration and the union. It will go into arbitration. So I'd just like to make that clear as well. Is the process that is going to go through tonight. So this evening, each member of the City Council will have an opportunity to ask questions from the administration and the union on the contract. I'm going to ask that each member of the City Council have an opportunity to speak once before we allow a member of the City Council to speak for a second time. We will be enforcing the City Council rules during the meetings, so we will be up here to the charter and the City Council rules as we move forward. Of Arms, who is here to answer any questions you may have while the meeting is going on. We look forward to having a good and robust debate regarding the contracts. Will be directed to the administration or the union, depending on what the contract is. Again, the members of the City Council did not negotiate this contract. We only have the right to vote up or down on ratification. So any and all questions will be directed to the proper individual or group who negotiated this contract. And I believe that is it for the process here. So at this time, are there any other general communications members of the council like to make at this time? Okay, hearing none. The purpose of the meeting is to ratify the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Warwick and the Warwick Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 7 for the period of July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2024, and the City of Warwick and RI Council 94, AFC, AFS, CME, AFI, AFL, CIO, Local 1651 for the period of July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2024. At this time, we will take up PCR 122-21, resolution relative to the ratification of the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Warwick and the Warwick Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 7 for the period of July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2024. Is there someone here from the administration that would like to present this evening?
Thank you. Nationally, police departments are experiencing mass retirements and recruitment challenges. Proposed legislation in numerous states, including our own, looks to take away police officer rights, limit the use of force powers that allow officers to protect themselves, all at a time when legislation is reducing sentences, decriminalizing certain crimes, and looking to defund the police. It is no wonder why young men and women in their 20s and 30s no longer want to serve their communities as police officers. Both sides of the negotiating table understood this reality and not only wanted to provide a contract that would support recruitment efforts, but more importantly, make the city of Warwick competitive within Rhode Island for the small amount of qualified candidates, most of whom will apply to numerous agencies. The other objective that we hope to accomplish with this contract is to allow for the department to appeal to Rhode Island post-certified officers that can transfer from other cities. This allows the department to get trained officers on the road quicker and reduces the amount of overtime associated with insufficient staffing. This contract contains a salary increase of 2.75% for the first year, 3.75% for the second year, and 3.75% for the third year, as well as civic detail rate of pay increase by $1 for each year of the contract, bringing that to $45, $46, and $47 in the last year. Non-civic details increase $1 to $51 per hour for the length of the contract. The following are managerial rights changes to the contract. This contract now limits the amount of days that can be exhausted upon retirement by reducing the number of Kelly days, holiday comp, and overtime comp hours that can be run out. The number in each category is now capped at 100. During previous contracts, when the number was unlimited, members could remain on the department roster receiving regular pay for up to 7 months before being placed on the retirement rolls. The contract would also allow for the temporary transfer of officers between platoons for up to 1 month. This would significantly reduce the amount of overtime if one particular platoon was experiencing a manpower shortage, resulting in reduced overtime expenditures. These are just some of the highlights from the tentative agreement. I assume you have all the time to read through the document, and I am available throughout the meeting to try and answer any specific questions you may have. Finance Director Peter Schaefer is also in attendance tonight if you have any questions pertaining to the fiscal impact of the contract. Thank you.
Very much, Colonel. And you touched on this, and I think this is the issues that we're going to hear right off the bat. People want to know the cost of the contract, what it's going to cost. Now, I know Mr. Schaefer provided us with a fiscal note on this as well. You mentioned the salary increases would be 2.75% increase for the first year, 3.75 for the next 2 years. Can you talk about, Colonel? Can you really highlight about recruitment for not only for for police officers, not only for the city of Warwick, but the state of Rhode Island and the country as a whole at this time?
Correct. We're not just seeing the impact of the national crisis in policing. The state in general is seeing it. State police typically would have thousands and thousands of applicants, and they were lucky to weed out down to about 100 to 200 qualified applicants. The numbers that I have here show what's happening in Warwick, and it's not dire, but it's putting us in a position where we're ending up with recruitment lists of eligible candidates that are in the single digits, when we used to have eligibility lists from 50 to 100. Typically, we would run a recruitment every 2 years. As you know, we come to the council to ask for several thousands of dollars a year for our recruitment efforts. We used to do it every 2 years. We went to 1 year about 2 years ago. Now we're recruiting continuously because we are in an effort to find the qualified candidates. It's a small pool of qualified applicants, and they are not just applying to the city of Warwick, they're applying to just about every open department. So we're quite literally battling other departments to get those recruits signed on as fast as we can. Oftentimes, our eligibility list starts out at 10 or 12 people, and within months, it whittled down to 5 or 6 because they've taken jobs at other cities and towns. So it's a tough need, and we really need to appeal. We have made concessions in the past which limit the health care and have raised the number of years that new recruits now have to do to get their pension. So if we take that coupled with non-competitive wages and a high percentage that they pay towards their pension were not marketable across the state.
Important to put that in context is that, the reason why our police department is so sought after is the men and women that make up that department. So we want to recruit the best and the brightest to come and join us. And so does every other city in town, in the state and in the country and in this region. Warwick pays about 16, almost 17% of their contributions to the pensions. Correct? For the Warwick Police Department. I believe it's 16.71%.
That's correct.
Now, that is an outlier compared to other cities and towns from my research that Providence, Wesley, and Cranston all pay a lot less into their pensions per pay period.
Correct.
Significantly less.
Yeah, the closest to us is Providence, and they have a plan to incrementally get to 13.5. And that's over the next 3 years. After then is Cranston that pays 10%, and most of the other agencies are down below 10%.
So that is one of the reasons why the 3.75% for the second and the third year is was an important part of these negotiations, because if you increase pensions, and again, you're paying the 16%, almost 17%, if you try to increase that, you'd be pushing up to almost 20%.
Correct.
And that is really difficult when you're recruiting young men and women who are in their 20s, thinking like, hey, they're only going to take 10% out if I go to a different city and town, as opposed to that. Makes our pensions a lot stronger, which is an excellent thing. But on the other hand, it could hurt us in the recruitment area. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct. And when combined with the healthcare copay that they pay, they're at 21.95% that they're paying right now. So they're losing about 22% just walking in the door.
In their payments there. Colonel, do the police stay, or do they go on to Medicare when they turn 65?
They go to Medicare when they're 65.
So the Warwick Police Department, when you retire, you have health care, but once you turn 65, you go on to Medicare.
Correct.
So it is not health care for life for the police department.
Correct.
Thank you, Colonel. You added a couple of different things that will increase, how much this will cost. Any changes to OPEB? Did you start an OPEB? Did you look into that? Is there a reason why it's not included?
There are no changes to OPEB. It was brought up, however, quickly realized that that would be a non-starter in negotiations, and we felt that we were better served moving on to other things.
And unlike other departments, you haven't been able to bring on a full class. So it would really affect one or two individuals, as opposed to if we were going to bring on 20 new officers, they would all know it's
correct.
When you're
we
in the
typically
recruiting
put
business,
on anywhere between 5 to 10 new officers per year. However, it should also be noted that changes to the OPEB were done back in 2012 and 2015, which significantly changed retirement benefits for new hires at that point. And we're at a point now where 54% of our agency right now was on and falls under the post-2012 mandates.
and Colonel, that's a great point. Again, these contracts are negotiated over a number of years, give and take between the two collective bargaining agreement groups throughout the years, and that's what we're looking at. These are results of a number of years. It's not just the negotiations that this administration currently did. They start off with a lot of history that are built into these contracts.
Correct.
I did note that there is additional 3 days for paternity leave, and I know a lot of companies across the United States are doing that. I'd like to, just point that out, that I think that's a step in the right direction now. We all spend a lot of time with our families, and we see how important that is, and I think having something like a paternity leave is important, and I'm glad to see that in the contract as well. So those are some of the things I wanted to highlight this evening and ask. So I'm going to open it up to my colleagues. Do we have any questions from members of the City Council at this time for the Colonel? Councilman Sinapi.
Hi, Colonel. Can you hear me? There we go.
Yes, Ken.
So I saw that there was a change regarding overtime when it's within a 1 hour of someone's shift. I know I spoke to someone already at how it works. Can you explain it to everyone else?
Absolutely. So we have a 4-hour minimum when it comes to overtime. So if a officer was to work a 7 to 3 p.m. shift and was to get off that shift at 3 and come back in at 3:30 for a meeting or an event, then they would receive an automatic 4 hours of overtime in the existing contract. What I asked for was to change that, so anything up within an hour. So if an officer gets off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and he has a meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it would be a continuation of duty. And if he worked that meeting for an hour, he would only receive 2 hours of compensation, not the minimum 4 hours.
Right. Now someone can't come in for like 10 minutes and get 4 hours out of it for overtime.
Not if it's within an hour of their shift. Absolutely.
And then the reduction in runtime, it basically amounts to what, about 50%?
I'm sorry, the
Reduction as far as if someone accrues leave and then they retire?
That's correct. Yeah, we capped those, each individual category at 100 hours. We were seeing in certain cases that people would bank up so much time over the years that they would retire in May and they'd continue to be on the books till December. And that creates a lot of hardship, especially when they're at high-ranking positions, because we have the balance of whether or not we promote somebody to fill that spot because we need them, but then we're paying two people that same wage. So now we're capped, and we're going to see that number reduction significantly.
And I'm not sure to what extent this was made clear to everyone, but basically when you combine the pension contribution with the medical contribution, what are our police force actually putting in? Isn't it roughly like 22% of their paycheck?
That's correct. 21.95% of their paycheck.
All right. So that in light of that, it actually kind of makes sense why we weren't able to go with higher contributions elsewhere.
Right.
Because unfortunately, the whole thing when it comes to getting police officers in the state is it's about economics. If you can't pay as much or you're taking more out of their paycheck, why would they come here if they can go elsewhere?
Right.
And I noticed just a few things. I noticed the Bill of Rights get added in for police. I noticed the quality of life changes. Some of them, like now AC is required, not just in replacement cars. But it's required at all cars now.
Yeah, a lot of that was just clearing up some wording that was stuck in there probably from the 80s. We no longer have wire mesh cages in the back of our police cars. Everything's plexiglass. We don't use reloaded bullets anymore. So a lot of it was just agreed upon by both sides that we would take this opportunity to clean up the contract and make it more modern and readable.
Do you guys expect going forward, assuming this contract passes, to have more luck on the recruitment end?
We hope so. Absolutely.
That's all I have for now.
Councilman, any other questions from members of the City Council? Councilman Lattiser.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Chief. Chief, I am very sympathetic, I guess you could say, towards the police department and the job that all your officers do. You and I have had the conversation before, and I said right along, you would never get me to be a police officer. The times have changed dramatically, particularly for the police department, particularly for men and women who are making, in some cases, millisecond decisions in their life and death decisions. And I'm very respectful of that. I have no problem with the salary increases that the police department is requesting. Since I've been on the city council, I've always found the police department to be reasonable. You don't always get what you want, and you accept that respectfully. I have no problem with the salary increases that you're looking for in this contract. as an elected official, I also have a responsibility to the people that pay the bills, which is the taxpayers. Where I have a problem with not just your contract, but the contract that's coming up next, is, again, there is no change to deal with the elephant in the room. And that is the cost of healthcare. It's the cost of the OPEB. And I have the 2020 report here. And in the last 2 years, from 2018 to 2020, the OPEB liability has increased $20 million. That's in 2 years. Some time ago, I put on the floor a proposal to revamp the healthcare system here in the state, in the city of Warwick. And there were some issues, there was some pushback. There were some questions about possibly some components of it maybe exceeding state law. But the fact of the matter is, I just recently found out that some departments are not even contributing 20% towards the cost of health care. So we have a situation here where this is growing and has been growing out of control for many, many years. And no one wants to deal with it. No one wants to bring it out in the front and say, we have a significant problem that at some point we're not going to be able to pay for. It's almost as though I can outlive it. I can outlive it before this becomes a problem. At some point, that's not going to change. And I know some people sitting in this room have heard this time and again for many years, but nothing's changed. The only thing that's changed is the indebtedness continues to grow. We have taxpayers in this city that struggle every day. We have a 20% copay at best. We have a cap on prescription drugs, which is certainly close to the lion's share of our healthcare expenses. We have a cap on the single plan of $300 for prescription drugs, for the copay. We have a cap of $600 for family. We now have, and have had for I think about 2 years, more retirees than we have active employees. And that should be a concern to the active employees. Retirees in the last several years haven't been retiring with a $25,000, $30,000, $35,000, or even $40,000 pensions. We have some pensions that are very high, 5 figures, some that are actually over 6 figures with no copay. That makes no sense to me at all, that there is no copay on retirees' health care. To the police department's credit, when the police department retires, you no longer get lifetime health care. There was a change some years ago before I got on the council that eliminated family lifetime health care in the city. Things have got to change. We had, let me rephrase that. I had a couple of years ago an accounting firm run the numbers for me in the plan that I proposed before this city council. It's still on the floor. Increasing the copay for health care. Eliminating lifetime health care for any new hire, whether that hire be in police department, fire department, DPW, school department. Eliminating lifetime health care when that employee retires. Increasing the cap on prescription drugs and assigning a copay over a certain level of retirement income on the retirees. That was a couple of years ago. And the projected savings then was over $5 million a year. We continue to struggle to buy police cars. We got a DPW that is working, let me back up. Until recently, thanks to the current administration, was working with some 30, 35, or 40 less employees and a whole bunch of vehicles that just could no longer function, could no longer run. $5 million a year would pay for a lot of vehicles. This problem is not going to go away. The numbers in 2004 the healthcare expenses in 2004 for the city of Warwick was $11.9 million. For 2022, based upon what we have, it's $24.5 million. The taxpayers cannot continue to afford to pay this. Chief, I have no problem with the salary increases that you're looking for the officers. I totally support that. I believe our police officers need and should be paid at least the same amount as other departments in this city. Our officers are in harm's way 24/7. As soon as they put on the badge, they're in harm's way. It's not just on occasion. But as an elected official, I have that ultimate responsibility to the taxpayers. And I have to go by my conscience. And my conscience says, if we can't afford to pay for it, then I can't support it. And without an increase in the health care for the city of Warwick, increase in the copays, increase in the cap on prescription drugs, doing away with lifetime health care for all new hires. I'm not looking to take away anything from a current employee. And implementing a copay on retirees on all new hires. I'm not going to be able to support any contract that doesn't address that. That is, in fact, where Judgment Day is not that far down the road. And we keep hearing it, and I know there's some people bored with hearing it again. But the reality is the reality, and sooner or later, we're going to have to deal with that issue. Mr. President, that's my feelings with this. That's my positions, why I will not be able to vote in favor of not just this contract, any contract that does not increase the participation in the health care and reduce the significant burden on the taxpayers who are footing the bill. Bear with me 1 minute. And these OPEB projections that I have, this is probably a question for Peter, Mr. Schaefer. I believe that we've been told in the past that there is certain assumptions that are forecasted into the GASB 75. Could you talk to us about that, please? Because that also has a large potential.
Thank you. Certain reasonable assumptions in terms of
Right, the
participants
assumptions, exactly.
being married. Although
Or
I'll tell you,
assumptions of people paying X dollars and cents above what
Right.
they're required to pay. Aren't these
although I
forecasts
just
based
want
on
to say
that?
one thing, Councilman. I mean, I was communicating with a couple of months ago, and I pointed one thing out to her, and she said, "Oh no, we're not doing that." And what they're not doing, which they should be doing, is that this council, the Aberdeen administration, this council approved the change to the ordinance, approved changes to labor contracts in 2015, I believe, that makes the OPEB benefit single plan, I think for both municipal workers, police, and fire, for people hired after 2015. They're not factoring that in there, and they agreed with me that any future reports that should be factored in there, and that would reduce the liability. You need to benefit from things you do, and this council and a previous administration did something on the labor front to change the benefit. And it's not factored into the numbers you have there. It will be the next time around.
So how are we to deal with this runaway cost of health care, an increase in liability of $20 million in 2 years? There is no way we can tax our way out of that problem. That is impossible to do. Because the most we can increase taxes is a tad over 8 million a year. That's the most we can increase. We can never tax our way out of the problem. The only way we can keep us from eventually coming to deal with the problem that would have a negative impact on everyone is to start dealing with it today. We heard this 5 years ago, we heard it 10 years ago, we heard it 15 years ago, but we never started dealing with it. You can't continue to add on to the credit card bill and only pay the interest, because eventually you're going to be bankrupt. It can't continue. So I don't know when the day is going to get here that we start addressing the problem of the out-of-control healthcare costs. Mr. President, I'll relinquish the floor to my colleagues and just request an opportunity for rebuttal if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Are there other members of the council who'd like to ask some questions to the administration? Councilman Ricks.
Thank you, Council President. First, I just want to say that I have tremendous respect for Warwick's Police Department, one of the greatest departments in the nation, absolutely among the best, if not the very best in the state. I think that the agreement was negotiated in good faith, and I would also agree with Councilman Lattiser that although some folks may look at the series of raises, 2.75% in the first year and then 3.75% in years 2 and 3 in a different fashion. I think that because the agreement was negotiated in good faith, I don't have a problem with that schedule of raises. I think that in the short term, the city is capable of honoring those promises. However, where I have significant differences with how this contract is presented is that OPEB, which stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits and is namely retiree health care. Unfortunately, this contract does nothing to fund those long-term liabilities. As of the current moment, the city, aside from $250,000 in the current fiscal year budget, has done nothing to set aside funds for OPEB. And unfortunately, under this proposed contract, there wouldn't be anything done for our police officers to ensure that retiree health care is funded out into the future. Before I get into some of the details here, I think that it might help to put some of this in perspective for members of the public who are listening in. So something that we all might be a little more familiar with is at the federal level, Social Security. We all know that in a number of years, estimates vary. Could be 10 years, could be 12 years, maybe a little longer, maybe a little less. The Social Security Trust Fund is going to run out. And if absolutely nothing is done, then it'll look something along the lines of retirees will receive about 75 cents or 80 cents on the dollar, 75%, 80% of what they are expecting to receive, which for many people who are relying on that, that's going to be devastating. Well, to put OPEB in perspective, we don't have that sort of trust fund that the federal government has with Social Security. We, aside from that $250,000, which is not, I don't believe would be applied toward the police in particular, as that $250,000 is it's my understanding that that's a matter of the firefighter contract for relative to the new hires, that contract that was ratified about 2 years ago now. Well, to put that in perspective, the city has, as of June 30, 2018, which is the numbers a couple of years ago, back in 2019, we haven't had a report from the actuaries since 2019, over 2 years ago now, August 2019. The actuaries told us that the total OPEB liabilities for Warwick are over $400 million as of June 30, 2018. That's specifically a grand total of $405.8 million divided between the relatively small number of $53.4 million on the school side, and the much larger number relatively of $352.4 million on the city side between all of our active employees and retirees who are entitled to retiree health care. I also just want to clarify briefly that although retirees do go on Medicare when they are eligible at age 65, they continue to be eligible for the city chipping in on a Medicare supplement plan. So the cost doesn't entirely go away, and I think that it is a fair statement to say that because of those ongoing liabilities, obligations, that it is, in a form, lifetime health care. I can respectfully disagree with others who might see that, might want to characterize that a little bit differently, but no matter how it's characterized, we have, as of 3 years ago, June 30, 2018, over $350 million in obligations that it's growing. The total cost of OPEB is growing by $35 million a year. So of that, the city is paying about $10 million a year out of its operating budget to take care of those costs as they come up. But then, as more employees retire, more employees are living longer, and that's of course unequivocally a good thing. However, that does mean that we have these costs, and the bill has to get paid. And so, much like Social Security, if it's not funded, then it's essentially the federal government making a promise and then breaking the promise when people are in the greatest need. With the city side, here at the local level in Warwick, I see it as something even worse, because it's not just a matter of breaking a promise to those in need and then you see the benefit cut by 20%, which can certainly be devastating right there. But instead, when the debt is growing by $25 million a year, and with a maximum tax increase, we're only able to raise taxes by $8 million a year if we put every single penny into it, you can see how we are continuing to dig a hole deeper and deeper and deeper without any real plan to honor these promises. I'm 35 years old. I don't know exactly when this is all going to catch up to us. We don't have a current report from the actuaries that's saying that, okay, at the current pace we have X number of years. But when we take a look at the rate that this obligation is growing, we can take a look at the total liabilities. It doesn't take actuaries, it doesn't take Einstein to realize that we are not going to solve a problem by digging ourselves deeper and deeper and deeper. And the easiest thing that we can do, easiest thing that I could do or anyone in my position could do, is just say, we'll figure it out later on. Well, we won't worry about it for now. We're in tough times right now. We can figure it out in 3 years, 6 years. Well, we've been, unfortunately, having that kind of line of thinking for decades. If not now, when? At a certain point, the hole is going to get so deep that drastic, very severe changes are going to be needed. And I don't want us to get to that point where such severe changes are needed that it's going to be so painful for everyone involved, and then people end up getting the rug pulled out from under them when they have no other options, when they were relying on this. I am not going to make a promise that I don't think can be kept. I do think, though, that we can get out of this hole. We've been in similar situations before with the Fire and Police Pension 1. And what happened there was not too dissimilar from how we got into this particular situation. There were years where pensions were promised, and then no one, not the employees, not the city, nobody was contributing to them and we got ourselves in a pretty deep hole. Then there was a compromise in the 1990s. Actually, 3 new pension plans were set up. Those pension plans, the employees would contribute towards. The city also contributed towards. The money was invested in the stock market. The money grew. Those 3 pension plans, they're doing great now. And I think that that's a huge selling point for new recruits coming to Warwick, is that, sure, these other cities and towns, they might charge you a little less now for your pension, but can you count on that pension to be there when you need it? I'd rather, if I was in that position, I'd rather pay more now and be sure that it's actually there than pay less and live with that uncertainty. Similarly, I think that a similar solution presents itself with OPEB. I think that retiree health care, especially for our city employees, firefighters, police, our city workers, it is a great benefit. And I think that there are ways that we can keep it, not just for existing and active employees, but even for new hires. The problem is that it needs to be funded. This isn't a radical idea here. This is, if we can do this along the model of the pensions, it's the same issue that we had before back in the 1990s, and it is a problem that can be solved. But if we wait too long to tackle it, then it's going to just result in the folks who are recently retired, the folks who are now actively working, and the new hires in future years. Everyone will just get the rug pulled out from under them when they expect that benefit to be there and it isn't. So for those reasons, because this problem, OPEB, is not being funded under this contract, I have to express my regret that I'm not able to cast a vote in favor of approving it. At 35 years old, I don't know how long it will take for, if we stay the current track, for us to hit that cliff. I don't know if we're talking 10 years out, 20 years out, but one way or the other, when I'm 45 or 55, I'm still going to be here in Warwick. And I want to be able to look our active police employees, our retired police officers, I want to be able to look them in the eye and say, thank you, for starters, from the audience. But beyond that, I want to be able to look them in the eye and just say that I did not make any promises to you that I didn't think that could be honored.
Councilman, are there any other members of the council? Councilman Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chief and members of the FOP 7, I would like to start by saying that I do thank you for negotiating, working out with the federal government, or working out that you will have insurance, health insurance, until you're 65. I can tell you that in the city there are members that work for the city that do not take that option. Some of them are members of the council who retire and have a lifetime of health care. Definitely fall under the part-time status, if you will. Don't contribute to the amount that you contribute or your members contribute. I've been hearing this drum, and it's not boredom. And I guess to put it in the words that my colleague here said, put it in perspective, I would agree this is an issue that's got to be addressed, but let's start in this house and this council first. We have numerous members in the previous councils where the minimal requirement was to work 6 years, 3 terms, and you got a lifetime of health care. As a matter of fact, the predecessor that sat in that council president chair is now enjoying a lifetime of health care, but he was the one who beat the drum the hardest. That the workers and the full-time workers in our police and our fire and our municipal should not get the health care. I'm going to call out arrogance and hypocrisy where I see it. And quite honestly, every time we have these negotiations, I hear these same comments brought up, and they're valid comments. But let's start cleaning house at house. Let's address this. And for the record, I will not attack someone for wanting health care for their family, but I will not stand by and watch people who have advocated for their family go after the families of others. I turned down the health care and I turned down the pension. That is my responsibility. That's step one of addressing the elephant in the room. And let's put things in perspective. Let the people who have worked and contribute the full amount to their health care get the health care. And I thank the FOP7 and I thank the chief for you guys taking the step to go ahead to Medicaid, Medicare, and this contract will have my support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Foley.
Thank you. I'll keep my comments brief. I bring a little different perspective, I think, to this in the sense that I was a union president and negotiated for my members, and I did that over a course of almost 20 years. I was dragged back, and I mean that sincerely, dragged back into the union presidency numerous times to help negotiate a contract, to bring the sides together. And I understand that the contract in front of us today was not negotiated in a bubble. It's been negotiated over 20 or 30 years. So to get where you were today with no increase in healthcare costs to the members, no increase to pension contributions from the members, you gave up stuff 20 years ago to get that benefit. And I compliment you on that you have stepped up to the plate time and time again and negotiated. When you come to us with a finished product, that's a give and take from both sides. It didn't one side cave to another. It doesn't get here if that happens. Trust me, I've been there. I called the only one-day strike in the history of William M. Davies High School. Never been done before. But it got the members what they deserved and got the school a fair deal also. And because it's not, I see this as not being in a bubble, I am voting in favor of this contract and the next one we're about to hear for the same reason. Knowing that both sides came to the table, both sides gave and took, but not just this year or these 3 months, but over the lifetime of these contracts. And some of them go back more than 20 years. They go back 30 years, maybe 40 years. I've been fortunate enough that my father was a firefighter in the city of Pawtucket for over 33 years, and I had a copy of his paycheck when it was like $3.30, way back right after World War II, when there weren't unions. And they could not negotiate. So the finished product I see in front of me, I think is adequate for the city and for the members. And I would be voting in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Are there any other questions from members of the council? At this time, are there any questions from members of the public? And the Sergeant of Arms will set you up on the mic. Good evening.
Good evening. My name's Cindy Wilson. I live in Warwick. I first want to say that this is not a question of are the police and the firefighters worth it? It's not that question. We know they're worth it. It's a question of can we pay it? I'm sure all of you have a checking account, and you must know that if you have put money in, you have to be able to take money out the same amount, or you have overdraft. And I think that's what we've been working on, is our overdraft. So I have a question, because I'm not really tech savvy, and I spent some of the afternoon trying to find these contracts. Can I ask you, Mr. President and council members, and can I ask people to not be on their phones and their computers while I'm talking, because it's not easy to get up here. It's nerve-wracking, so I would appreciate everyone's attention. Mr. Sinapi. So, can I assume that you've all read the contract? Yes? Yes? You won't answer?
Ma'am,
So I'm gonna-
we're going to ask questions about the contract, please.
Well, but because here's the thing. If you're going to talk about the contract, I would at least hope that you read it. I didn't read it because I couldn't find it. But yet you want the public to come here and have an opinion on something they had no access to. That doesn't make sense to me. And I'm going to go with the fact that not everybody shook their head, that many people didn't bother to read it. So then let me ask you this, Mr. President. Can you tell me what the long-term ramifications are to the taxpayers and the debt of the city?
Again, we're going to direct all the questions to the administration. If there's someone from the administration would like to answer that question. And just repeat it once they come up, please.
I mean,
So the question was,
yeah.
are there long-term ramifications to the taxpayers and the debt of the city because of this contract?
Well, I prepared a fiscal note for the council, and I can talk about that. But that's one aspect of all the total costs of the city. And
So is that a yes or a no? It's a real simple question.
The amount of money that this contract costs in fiscal year '22 is budgeted in the city budget. As you go forward, there will be other costs in other areas. There will be revenues in other areas. We will be putting another budget together for the council's consideration next year. It may deal once again with OPEB. It may deal once again with other labor costs, with pledging American Rescue Funds, which we reserved over $18 million in the budget that the council approved. So this is a cost. I've documented what the cost will be. And we know what our revenue stream is like. This
Is that
fiscal note
available to
speaks
the public to
issue
see?
Of the fact that, yes, the city can afford it.
Person speak at a
Certainly
time.
The fund
Yeah, I
balance is
get it.
well over $30 million in the city. So
Is that available to the public to see?
the city budget is a published document.
The one that you presented to the council?
Yes.
Okay. So then, because OPEB isn't in there, is that a defect in the contract? Because that's kind of making a budget and leaving out something like the mortgage? I mean, does that make it,
You know,
I mean, I don't know, it would seem to me that that's kind of huge. Okay.
I don't believe that's correct. I mean, the council knows.
Actually, I took it right off of.
Excuse me, we're going to have one person speak at a time. You ask a question, the director can answer the question. Go ahead, Director.
Well, as you know, the council approved the new health insurance contract that has the price per health insurance contract going down 0.5% this year. And we expect something way low. And there were a period 10 years ago when you were seeing cost inflation in the 9 to 11% range. You're correct, but that has not been the case over the last several years.
Okay, well, I actually read that on Rob Cushman's Taxpayer Spin. And as we all know, he's really good at numbers since he does that for a job. So I will reach out to him, but for everyone to know, you can go on Facebook Taxpayer Spin or Next Door Neighbor, and you
Yeah,
can
thank
see.
you. Do you have any more questions regarding the?
Oh, I'm sorry, you're interrupting me. No, I wasn't finished. You just said one person
You're
talks at a
plugging your
time.
website. We're here to discuss the
Plugging a
contract.
website. I'm trying to inform the taxpayers, which you seem unwilling to do. Okay, let's see. The other thing I have to know. Well, no, I don't believe that, but, I don't.
We're only going to have
talk
one
out of
person
turn.
speak. She has the floor at this time.
No, Rob Cushman's actually very smart, though, so. Well, I can see that this is going nowhere but down, sadly, but I want all of you to know, I honor you, Ed, and I honor you, Mr. Ricks, for having the guts to say the truth. And there'll be another election, and I will walk on bloody stumps in your ward and tell everybody what you said here and let them know how it affects their taxes, because you're not being fair to the taxpayers. And by the way, I don't believe that there is a pension for council members. Am I wrong? Someone had mentioned that they get a pension. I think it was, you do get a pension? Okay, but it is available? I was told that it wasn't. All right, well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak at this time?
Good evening, members of City Council, citizens of Warwick here in attendance tonight, those watching at home, and to the members of the Warwick Police FOP 7 here in attendance tonight. My name is Jedediah Pino, and I am the FOP Lodge 7 President. I stand here before you to speak on behalf of the contract between the city and the Lodge, and to ask for your support and vote in favor of ratifying this contract. Our Lodge has and does faithfully dedicate our services to the community of Warwick. We have worked with the city in times of financial difficulties to maintain the viability of the city, along with ensuring our members are properly represented through compensation and working environment. During the fiscal crises of 2009, the city came to us prior to our contract expiring and asked us to take a pay cut. For 17 weeks, we took a reduction in pay of 3.25% and reduced our ranks by 15 officers through attrition. This reduction caused our department to limit specialty divisions, and this reduction effectively disbanded our traffic and community police divisions for some time. In the 2009 contract, we then took a 0% raise. We also foregoed financial payment for our holiday and clothing allowances for the year. These did not come without huge compromises from the union. We are still to this day trying to increase our manning to an appropriate level. In 2012 contract, we took 3 years of a 0% raises. We changed our retirement for new hires from 25 years of a service for a minimum earned pension instead of 20. Changes to a maximum earned pension were also changed with an increase of an additional 5 years of service to earn a maximum pension, which also coincided with a reduction of 5% total accrual. We additionally changed the COLA that year from a 3% COLA to only 75% of the consumer price index for that year. Another note that I believe is important is during that time, former Mayor Avedisian offered a $1,000 bonus to each union employee when there were additional resources found. The FOP did not take this money as a show of good faith and gave the city over $150,000 in savings that year. We further worked with the city to continually reduce OPEB obligations on our end in the 2015 contract by changing healthcare and retirement from family healthcare coverage to single coverage. These all add up to significant cost savings to the city. We continually show our willingness to work with the city. In this current contract, our union has once again worked with the administration in agreeing to a 50% reduction in running out time upon retirement. It also gives broader managerial rights to the colonel in regards to staffing and organization within the department. This agreement is a contract that will keep the senior officers from retiring, and in return, they will be able to impart their knowledge on the young officers as we attract new officers to come work for the city. The mainstream media and special interest groups have waged a war on law enforcement by spreading a false narrative. This, along with changes to our pension and healthcare benefits, has left a dark shadow over career aspects in law enforcement. There's no arguing that changes to our health and pension systems along with a negative mainstream media portrayal of all law enforcement, has affected our ability to keep valuable employees within our department and our ability to recruit new, young, educated men and women to fill the voids. Years ago, recruitment applications for our department would range over 1,000 applicants trying to join the ranks of Warwick Police. Over the past 6 years, we've seen a dramatic decrease in applications, which continue to drop. The past 3 years, we've seen such a decline in recruitment, our applications are now well below 100. Our final hiring list is usually just around 10 applicants. That's applicants only. Those are not the ones who have been vetted and have simply passed a minimum physical fitness standard, initial written test, and oral interview. They have not been vetted candidates who have passed an intensive background check. We've also found that top candidates on our list are usually on the lists of the rest of Rhode Island police departments, as most of our recruitment efforts are generally the same time due to the police academy only running twice a year. This makes us now competing against every other police agency, to include the Rhode Island State Police, to recruit and hire the best candidates. The average recruit hired now has a minimum of a bachelor's degree. They are young, smart, educated individuals. With so few candidates and the need for more officers across the state, the candidates have choices. We need to continue to be the most appealing and best police department to work for if we are able to maintain the professionalism of this department. As our senior officers from the rank and file each year retire and reach retirement age, which is occurring regularly at this time, we need to be able to fill those losses with highly qualified individuals. As I mentioned earlier, the current police academy runs 2 classes per year. Current staffing needs of other departments and maximum class sizes at the academy leave us with only the ability to put through usually a maximum of 10 recruits per training class. By the time a recruit graduates, gets through field training, it's at least 9 months. Wallet Hub has consistently ranked Warwick as one of the safest cities in the country, with low number of violent crimes per 1,000 residents. With violent crime much higher in surrounding communities, it's a true statement to the hardworking men and women of this police department. The hardworking, law-abiding citizens of this city deserve to live peacefully. The criminals around know to stay out of Warwick because they will be found and held accountable for their actions. This does not come without the relentless pursuit to keep our safe street by the men and women of this department. In closing, this contract preserves the manpower of this department. It keeps seasoned, hardworking, and vastly knowledgeable officers on the job. It keeps us as a premier police department that will attract new, educated, and qualified individuals, and allows us in turn to provide services to the community that are second to none. On behalf of the Warwick FOP7, I thank you for your time and consideration in this matter.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on the police contract? Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on the police contract? Okay. Are there any members of the city council that would like to speak that haven't had an opportunity to speak? Councilman Gephardt.
Thank you, Council President. So this, my first contract that I'm sitting here having the opportunity to evaluate, came here with an open mind, had the opportunity to speak with both members of the administration and members of the union on some questions that I had, which were answered to my satisfaction. And I appreciate that. You know, I'll say first, echoing what my colleague said, that I truly appreciate the efforts of the Warwick PD. I have found everyone that I've interacted with in that department to be of the utmost, respect and care for the citizens of the city, and we should expect nothing less. But that's been my experience, so I'm grateful for that, and I look forward to working with you all for many years. So I mean, I hear the concerns of my colleagues. You know, the bulk of my questions have been answered, but I would just direct a question to the administration. I'll leave it up to you who's the best to answer it, but you know, along the lines of some of the hesitations of other council members, you know, how do you, in your mind, frame the concerns that they share? So in you know, councilman from Ward 2 talked about, not wanting to make a commitment that the city can't uphold. And I am not a city financial director. I am not the mayor. I sit here, like I said, with an open mind. But I would just like to hear from someone who has that visibility into the finances of the city currently and into the future, to say, how do you feel, and how do you, when you put forward a contract like this, how do you rationalize that? And how do you, I would just like to hear the perspective on that. Is this a promise that the city can uphold? And aside from that, I really have no other questions.
Well, I think the focus of what I've heard from two councilmen is certainly on OPEB liability. And that's something, as you know, the council addressed during the mayor made a proposal, and you appropriated $250,000. Some people wanted to put more in. And that's an issue we'll be confronting in the next budget cycle. As I said to Councilman Lattiser, I believe that the current actuary has made a mistake in overstating the liability, not considerably, because it's a very significant liability. I won't dispute that. And I know, I deal with a lot of my colleagues. I know that the town of North Kingstown is got a major effort going to use American Rescue Fund to deal with the OPEB liability, which we didn't think was going to be allowed under the regulations, but it is. So there's a number of opportunities to address that issue. And I would say the council president, one of the issues is by making employees contribute. But the council president pointed out something that you should all remember. The Warwick police officers contribute by far the highest percentage out of their own pay for their retirement benefits. So going to another concern like OPEB for employee contributions when they're at 16.71% of pay contributed, and I think Providence is the next highest at 10.5%. That just wasn't a direction we could go. Now, we file a forecast with the state. We do a lot of assumptions. Would I have preferred, from my perspective, from my tunnel vision, that we were talking a 3.75% decline in compensation? Yes, but obviously that's not going to happen. But we know about the OPEB liability. It's one of the things that we as a city, the mayor, the council, and others have to work on. But going after employees for that is not something that appeared to be the right direction. So if your main focus is on OPEB, and I don't think the healthcare cost issues were accurately portrayed. I pointed out, and I'll say this again, the change that was made in 2015, and which the head of the FYP just talked about, to go to single plan OPEB benefit for those people hired after 2015, that was a big deal. And that will play out over the next 30, 40 years. And that's what you really have to look at, long-term horizons. And I see a good focus of this city on dealing with that issue.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's helpful, because it's been characterized that, this contract and other actions are, sort of sticking the head in the sand and ignoring it. But what I've observed, in this budget cycle with the establishment of the trust fund and through other actions, that, there seems to be a plan. But I think it's, for up to the administration and yourself, to help us understand that and what the long-term impact of that is. So, I appreciate that context. And as you continue working towards that, I appreciate that you keep us informed of that. And if, actuarial reports or other data changes, I just ask that you keep us top of mind on that.
I mean, just one more thing, and I mentioned this to the council president, and the mayor and I were dealing with John Howell on the Beacon. I think there'll be a story Thursday. And the retirement board had a meeting on this. Our investment return in all of the retirement funds, municipal, fire, police, for the year ended June 30th this year was 31.8%, 31.8%. And that doesn't deal with the OPEB liability, but it's going to moderate some of the costs that we have going forward to take care of the beneficiaries. And that's what we have to worry about, the beneficiaries. And the taxpayers, the cost to the taxpayers of helping those beneficiaries.
Councilwoman Travis.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just going to echo what you said at the beginning. Nobody on this council sat on that negotiation table. That wasn't our part. But as we listened, and I like to listen on both sides, and you could see that they did. They started working on it together. They have addressed a few of the issues. I mean, and Peter just said about the 17%, or close to 17%, Warwick's paying the highest. And then the reduction, you know, that they mentioned about the overtime and the shifting, how they've been nibbling at this contract. They've been working on it. We've had a bad year, a couple of bad years, let's put it that way. We just come out of the area where so many people, so many divisions, not only public works or the police department, we were shorthanded, we were less people working. It's been a real bad year. And I think they did a great job with this contract. I think they worked together, they sat down, they talked it out, and I think it's a good start. Yeah, do we need improvements? Of course we need improvements. Do we want to see things better? Absolutely, we want to see things better. And I do agree with Councilman Howell. I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of council people come do their 6 years and out the door, and they got their lifetime health care to go with them, okay? I don't take health care from the city of Warwick. And I could get it for lifetime if I wanted to. I didn't get that, and I've been here a very long time. Am I going to support these contracts? Both of them, you guarantee I will support them. I'm 100% behind these contracts. I think the city and the unions worked very hard to negotiate this. Thank you.
Are there any members of the council that haven't had a chance to speak that would like to speak? Okay. Are there any questions from members of the council that haven't already been asked yet? Councilman Ricks.
First, just something to clear up. As far as I know, I don't think that any member sitting on this council today is taking lifetime health care either because they're not eligible for it. I know that I'm not. That rule was changed before I was elected, or because of their own option, such as Councilwoman Travis just stated. So I want to make sure to put that out there. Although I do think that lifetime health care is an excellent benefit. And I do think that our employees deserve that. And I want to make sure that it's there for them so that what you're counting on, what you're promised, is actually delivered. Something that came up with my colleague from Ward 9, the discussion with the finance director, has to do with the $250,000 that the administration proposed and the city council approved in this year's budget for OPEB. I was the only member of this council that voted against the budget this year. And my primary reason for that was because I didn't think that the $250,000 was enough. So I want members of the public to know, I want our city employees to know that I'm not just going to speak here about employees doing their share in contributing to OPEB, but I also want to see the city do its share in making sure it makes its contributions, because it's got to be a two-way street, just like the pensions. The city and the unions, everybody needs to come together to solve this problem, because neither one side by itself is going to make sure that the money is there. It has to be both sides working together. I hear what the finance director says about, and for that matter, what my colleagues say about looking at this in the greater perspective. And I do agree with that, especially when it comes to those short-term costs, the raises, which, yes, I do believe that the city can afford those over the course of this year. The fiscal note clearly shows that, yes, that is within the budgeted amount. And I think that the city can reasonably afford it, those raises, in the next 2 years too. But what the city can't afford to do, and what the employees, our great employees, can't afford either, is to let another 3 years pass us by when we're getting deeper and deeper into the hole. You know what? $250,000 is better than nothing. But when these costs are in the order of $35 million a year, of which the city is paying out of pocket $10 million a year, that means we've got a $25 million difference in those obligations that keep adding up and adding up. Well, you take $25 million, you stack that up next to $250,000, that $250,000 is 1%. It's a drop in the bucket. It's not nothing. It's a step. And for that matter, I don't think that any of us expects, and I certainly don't expect, to see a contract that solves the problem in its entirety in front of us one day. We just come to the city council meeting and everything is worked out for us. But if we take a step in the right direction, at least, something that solves a significant part of the problem, not 1% of the problem, let's solve it 20%. And then 3 years from now, let's solve it another 20%. Let's make some big steps here. Not solve it 100% in one go, but unfortunately, I'm not seeing any big step here toward tackling this big problem. And without that, I'm back in that position of I am not going to put myself in a position where 10 years, 20 years down the line, whenever these bills come due and these bills aren't getting paid and people are losing their health insurance because none of us took the appropriate actions early enough. And God, I hope that day never comes. I pray that this problem gets solved. And there are many different ways to solve the problem, all of which involve everybody coming to the table and working together. But should that not happen, I do not want to have to look people in the eye and say, I'm sorry, we couldn't get that done. I'm sorry that you were given these promises, you had these contracts, you thought you were getting your lifetime health care, and now you're 60 years old and you don't have it. I do not want to see that day. So those certainly have to vote no at this time. And I won't keep repeating myself. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Councilman. Any other questions? Councilman Lattiser.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for Peter, please. Peter, I know that it's been some time that you haven't been back here with the city, and you've only been back a short while, but do you know what the breakdown is of the healthcare disbursements from 5 years ago with respect to retirees and active employees? So say 5 years ago, what I'm asking is, what percentage of our healthcare costs were for retirees, and what percentage of the healthcare expenses, I should say contributions, payments, were for active employees?
You know, it's in the budget. And I didn't bring a copy along.
Okay.
But if you go to the employee benefits page, there's the section, we budget healthcare for active police officers, healthcare for retirees, healthcare for active firefighters, healthcare for retired fighter, and the same with municipal employees. And the numbers are there. And I don't have in my head, I mean, obviously it's a very material amount for retirees. I don't dispute that. I would say it's probably 2/3, 1/3 active versus retiree, but I don't, I could get the numbers for you after if we take a break or after the meeting, but because it's right in the budget.
Councilman Lattiser, in the current fiscal year, the monies you budgeted for retiree health care.
I can't hear you, Bruce.
In the current fiscal year, the monies the council budgeted for health care split between active employees and retired employees, approximately 53% active, 47% retired.
It's a bit different than the numbers I have. So the numbers that I have is we now have a healthcare benefits distribution of 59% for retirees and 41% for active employees.
There's about $23 million total, of which $10.5 million, I believe, is on the retiree side.
Well, here's my point, is in the private sector, if we ever get to the point where our healthcare costs are more for our retirees than our active employees, the line is in the sand. You're going to be out of business. And the concern, as I mentioned earlier, if I were on the city's, working for the city, police officer, fireman, municipal worker, when you have more retirees than you have active employees, you're heading for a problem. Because eventually the cost of the healthcare for those active employees is going to have to continue increasing to keep up with the cost of the healthcare for the retirees who aren't paying anything. You don't need to be a mathematician to figure out that problem and to come up with the answer. When you're taking more out than you're putting in, you're heading for a significant problem. Mr. President, it's a business point of interest that I'm making. I don't, again, think you need to be a mathematician to understand that formula just doesn't work out. So, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Councilman Sinapi.
Just a quick point. The actuary that has been cited a few times tonight, when he came before us, he talked about how the pay-as-you-go method for OPEB, which we do, an example for the police, is one that's not uncommon. In fact, it's not only common, but in some places it's required. At least at the time, New York required it. I don't know if they still do. So when you hear these large numbers that sound terrifying on their face, sure. But then when you actually learn how OPEB works and how pay-as-you-go works, it's not what it seems. Those numbers are basically based on if everybody suddenly came down with some major illness who are covered right now. Not the reality of it is not everyone gets sick all at once. Period. You're not spending all that money at once. You pay as you go. If it was how it's played out to be here, we would have been bankrupt decades ago. It's just not reality. So just keep that in mind.
Councilman Howe.
Mr. President, I move favorable action on PCR 122-21.
Do we have a second? Second by Councilman Foley, Councilman McElroy, Councilman Gephardt, Councilwoman Travis. Any other additional questions? Hearing none, the clerk will call the roll for favorable action on PCR 122-21.
Mr. McAllister?
Yes.
Mr. Foley?
Yes.
Mr. Gephardt?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Lattiser?
No.
Mr. McElroy?
Yes.
Mr. Ricks?
No.
Mr. Sinapi? Ms. Travis?
Yes.
7 yes, 2 no, motion passes.
Thank you. PCR 122-21 passes. just going to request a quick 5-minute recess here to reset, and then we will come back for PCR 123-21. We'll be back here at 6:50. Thank you.
One, two, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. One, two. 1, 1, 2.
Welcome back, everyone. Next up on the agenda this evening is PCR 123-21, a resolution relative to ratification of the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Warwick and Rhode Island Council 94 AFSCME AFL-CIO Local 1651 for the period of July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2024. Is there someone here from the administration?
President McAllister and honorable members of the council. Yes, so we have a proposed contract with Council 94 for the fiscal year 22 through fiscal year 24, largely addressing pay and benefits. The proposed pay increases mirror the pay increases of the last 3 years for the expiring contract. That's 2.75% per year. I would note that I checked the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics website to determine what the overall average pay increases are throughout the country, and currently they're running at 3.2%. So this is we believe this is a very reasonable rate of increase for our employees to keep pace with cost of living. Actually, cost of living for the trailing 12-month period was 5.2%. So the 2.75% is not even keeping folks up with what the cost of living is, and it's hit on their wages. But we felt in the interest of taxpayers, this was a fair agreement, and the union has come to agreement with us on that. On pensions, we did get some concession to increase the rate of contribution by new hires. It'll increase from the current 9.5%, which is in the existing contract, to 10.5%. The current employees agreed to increase their contribution for 1 year, the current fiscal year, from 9.5% to 10%, in recognition that there were fewer employees due to layoffs in the prior year, contributing to the overall health of the plan. So that was an effort on their part to strengthen the plan. On health insurance, we did get a bump on new hires from 18% of premium contribution to 19%. A few other cost items that will affect the contract is shown in your fiscal note. The union requested, and the city has agreed to, shift differentials for second and third shift, 50 cents an hour on second shift, and 55 cents an hour for the third shift. There was also a small item that doesn't have a significant fiscal consequence. When an employee is working alone in a building, they will pay an extra 15 cents an hour. There were some additional minor contract language issues that are beneficial to management related to overtime. What call-in time is for requiring compulsory overtime. Obviously, during snow conditions and otherwise, it's important that we be able to get our manpower out there. Union was willing to work with us on insisting that employees are required to respond to overtime calls within a 4-hour period. Out of class pay, we agreed that if employee is moved from lower class to a higher class, they would remain in the same step that they were in the prior class. In some cases, when that bump is made from one class to another, if they're a top step in their lower class and move into the higher class, it's such small, minimal difference that they're not really getting recognized for the extra contribution that they're making. So that, in sum, is the contract proposal for the FY22 to FY24 contract period. I would note, given that OPEB rightfully received a lot of attention tonight, because that is a major issue facing the community, we had some discussion with the union over attempting to get additional or get contributions from the membership. We couldn't agree on the language. There are some questions, and I think you may have seen a note from the finance director regarding the compliance requirements for a OPEB trust. We couldn't, by the time that we reached agreement with the union on the overall issues within the contract. We could not nail down that last issue. So what we will do is within the next year is form a committee of administration, staff, and union membership to continue to discuss best way forward to address that significant liability.
Thank you very much, Director. So again, the first thing that we all look at when we review this, and I know that all my colleagues have reviewed both these contracts in detail and have meetings. We met with the administration, we met with the unions reached out. I know the council people reached out directly to the mayor and to you and to Peter as well when these contracts came out. Costs for the three raises, it's 2.75 for each year. 2.75, 2.75, 2.75, which is less than what was negotiated with the police department. And part of that, I was told, is because of the recruitment issue on the police department. That is a special case. So when you were sitting down and negotiating with the union, the Council 94, you were able to come to an agreement on the 2.75% increase, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. So healthcare and pensions, obviously a lot of discussion here tonight on that. Can you just highlight again, you mentioned it in your opening remarks, but please inform us again on new hires now, coming in out of this new contract as of July 1st, if this is to be ratified today, new hires, what will their percentage be compared to what employees that are already on the job?
The existing contract, if an employee had been hired prior to June 30th, their contribution rate would be 9.5% of salary. New hires going forward, it will be 10.5%, so full percentage point higher.
And on that is for pensions. What about healthcare?
Healthcare, the existing employees pay 18% of health premium as their contribution. New employees going forward will pay 19%.
So again, you were able to negotiate for new hires. They were going to pay a higher percentage than the current employees.
Correct.
You mentioned OPEB. You're still working on the language for that, but the goal of this contract is you're setting up a committee to discuss this and then to put something into place?
Yes.
And then after this, if this contract were to be ratified, you would then start that process?
Yes.
You mentioned second and third shifts. There's an increase, 50 cents for the second shift, 55 cents for the third shift, I believe. Can you just estimate who's working those shifts? About how many people does this affect? Like what departments or that work a second or third shift for the city?
Peter has some financial impacts of that, which probably better addresses your question in terms of what the impact is on the taxpayer.
Not so much as the impact, but more of the what jobs is it? Is it a number of, like, the majority of the people work first
dispatchers
shift?
would be a perfect example.
Okay. While he's getting that information, life insurance, there was also an increase in life insurance in this contract?
From $40,000 to a $50,000 policy.
So a $10,000 increase.
Very minimal cost to the city.
On that. Okay. And all right, I will pause for now. Are there any questions from members of the council? Any members? Councilman Sinapi.
So like with the police contract, I was glad to see the quality of life changes. The fact that now the city will provide the PPE when needed, and also that will actually allow for employees to be witnesses, whether it be arbitration or ULP hearings, which is scary that it wasn't a thing before, but I'm glad it's now going to be. When it comes to the OPEB, despite my statements as far as pay-as-you-go being an accepted practice, my preference is actually for the trust. And it looks like, at least based on the contract, that is the direction y'all are heading. I just wanted to see if that is in fact the case.
The acoustics in here are a little difficult. Could you repeat that?
Sure. So my preference in the long term is for an OPEB trust, because it's better to have it than not. But that being said, is that the direction you're going? Because based on the contract, it looks like it, but I'm not going to put words in your
I
mouth.
think it's a wide open discussion as to what the, what's of best interest of the taxpayers in the long run. And the health of the fund for all the reasons that were stated, to ensure that employees have healthcare available to them with a fiscally sound system at the time that they retire.
And presumably the contract as written will not be a burden as we continue to fill the gaps we have.
Correct.
That's all.
Gephardt. Thank you, Council President. Again, thanks for the presentation here and for getting to some of the questions in advance. One that I didn't get a great response and that caught my eye as I was reading the whole entirety of the contract. In section 14.1, there is a committee referenced that talks about for the purpose of accomplishing through cooperative effort their mutual objective to increase efficiency and productivity and to improve the conditions of employment, which I thought sounded like a great idea. And then I heard back that is old language and maybe hasn't met in a while. I'm wondering, since it's left in, is there an intent to revive that committee? And any other comments you have on that?
Yeah, you are correct. That committee, in the period of time that I've been with the city during 2 different administrations now, these committees have not been active. I don't know how long that provision has been in the contract. As Councilman McElroy has indicated, contracts are developed over a long period of time. And clearly, as you indicated, the value of that committee seems on its face to be important. And perhaps we will revive it, but there's been no action on that with a joint management labor meeting to discuss productivity or efficiency improvements. During the budget process every year, the department head is looking at opportunities for creating efficiencies within their field of operations. And they work with their first line supervisors who have the best field knowledge of where opportunities exist. But I don't know that the union has been directly involved in that process.
All right. Yeah, I would just say from, we all sit in our, in the ivory tower here, but some of the best suggestions come from the field. So whatever we can do to incorporate that feedback from the employees, I think is would be good moving forward. But thank you. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to just start off by saying to all of our municipal workers here, DPW workers, I recognize the fact of particularly the last year and a half of what you've all had to go through. You've been working with a reduced staff, some 30 to 40 people, through no fault of your own. You've had to deal with equipment failures time and time again. You've had trucks down. And in spite of this, you still came to work every day. You still did a good job. You went the extra mile, particularly recently, when in one day you had 7 vehicles down. I see the DPW trucks. I see the rubbish trucks driving through the areas at 7, 8 o'clock at night. And I commend each and every one of you for that. Having said that, I still have a responsibility to the taxpayers as well. I have no problem with the financial aspects of your contract. I have no problem with the raises that you've negotiated and agreed to and well-deserved. I have no problem with any of that. But the healthcare costs, the caps, the co-pays, the legacy costs, as we refer to them in the retirees, I can't go along with that. That's where we have the disagreement. And I'm not going to regurgitate everything that I said earlier. It's all been said, it's on the record, you've all heard it, and I maintain that position. I support you completely with the pay raises. Where we differ is in the movement on the costs to the taxpayers of the health care. And particularly important to all of you as the active employees is what happens when this math problem continues to grow. When you continue to increase the retirees and you have disproportionately less active employees, how's the bill going to be paid? That's my concern. And for that reason, as I said earlier, it's not just the police department contract, it's not just the municipal contract. I will not be supporting any contract that doesn't have an adjustment in the healthcare costs, the caps, the legacy costs. Thank you.
Councilman Ricks.
Thank you, Council President. So without going on and repeating the statements that I already made earlier, I do want to make sure to stay up front that you all do such a wonderful job working for the city day in, day out, whether it's good weather or when it counts the most, when we have those storms, whether it's Ida or these other hurricanes, tropical storms hitting us during the winter with the plows. I challenge any Rhode Islander to drive around the roads of Warwick, that is after the storm has stopped, after the DPW has had a chance to get out there with the plows. Go drive around the roads of Warwick versus any other city or town in the state. It's fantastic work. Those roads get cleared. Likewise, when we have those storms, you are the ones out there literally doing the heavy lifting. I just have to stop and commend for the hard work out there. And for that matter, you're working late into the night and late into your careers, working into your 50s, even 60s. And so in a way, the OPEB problem, because we're talking about fewer years, it really is a simpler issue to tackle here. And from what I'm seeing in the tentative agreement, the proposed contract, is that there's going to be the meeting of this committee. Both sides are going to work in good faith, come out with a plan that works for everybody, where the city and the employees are both going to figure out what works for both. I certainly don't expect that the problem is going to be 100% solved in one agreement. It's government. That's not how this all works. We didn't get ourselves into this whole position over the course of 3 years. We're not going to get out of it in 3 years. But I feel like this committee, and from speaking with representatives of the union, representatives of the administration, I have high hopes that this is going to take significant steps in the right direction. And if those steps were laid out in front of us, clear black and white language in front of us in that proposed contract this evening, then I would say, yes, I would vote yes on the contract, because both in the short term, the raises, well-deserved, well-earned, bargained in good faith, along with the rest of those terms that apply over the course of the next 3 years. And if it took a significant step, clear black and white language, okay, we're doing something big here to put a dent in the long-term OPEB liabilities, then I would have no hesitation in voting yes. Unfortunately, I see this as not that different from the contract that came up for a vote about a couple of years ago now with the firefighters union, where there was something, a significant step negotiated in good faith, which would, in theory, amount to the new hires paying 2% towards their healthcare costs, their retiree healthcare costs, and that amount being put in these restricted funds that were the employees' property, so that no matter what, that money is there for them, and that would all add up to about covering 27% of the cost of the health care when those employees, the new hires, went to retire. But not to rehash that whole issue from 2 years ago, there were some contradictions in the language. The example was not matching what the goal was stating. Example, if you did out the math, it came out to something like 10 or 12% instead of 27%. And so that vague language, that wasn't getting cleaned up. And so I had to vote no on that, because I'm not going to vote yes on an item where the language is, it's just, frankly, it was sloppy and it was unclear. And I hope that that particular issue, not that it's here in front of us tonight, but I do hope that that issue does get cleaned up in the future, because, you know, if all the parties, everyone seemed to be on the same page in terms of what was agreed upon, what was negotiated in good faith, and yet that wasn't showing up in the language. So I hope that this committee, I'm not here to do any negotiating, that's not my role, but I do want to express that I hope that the committee, that it comes to an agreement that works for everybody, that takes a significant step. And if it does, I'll be here 100% behind it to support it and make sure that the city is keeping its promises, that the city is contributing what it says it's going to contribute. Just like every year, we make sure that the city is paying in toward the pensions. I want to make sure that every year the city is paying in what it needs to be paying in to OPEB, to make sure that the lifetime retirement health care that's been promised is honored, and no one is left high and dry on this when they need that promise to be honored. So for those reasons, not that I have any concerns in terms of the agreement being negotiated in good faith, because it was. I don't have any concerns about whether the rest of the terms, because they were negotiated in good faith. And yes, our city workers, they deserve those terms. But because that language, whatever the committee, we hope, will decide a year from now, that's not here in front of us in black and white. It's just not something that I can approve without seeing it. So for that reason and that reason alone, unfortunately, I would intend to vote no tonight.
Thank you, Councilman. Are there any other questions from members of the council? Are there any questions from members of the public? Ma'am, please. The Sergeant at Arms will turn the microphone on for you.
Okay, so it seems that, in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, you did all read the contract according to President McAllister. So my question is it available to the public? Because it's so hard to get up here and say something without knowing the facts, at least for me. So is it available to the public?
It is.
It's on the city's website, Personnel Department, and it's a link on that website.
Okay, thank you. I looked all over. I'm not very techie, and I couldn't find it. So correct me if I'm wrong. The DPW trucks haven't been replaced, which is why they're breaking down. And my understanding is they haven't been replaced because we had to reallocate the money, the budget for those things to help pay for the very thing we're talking about. That's my understanding. So I'm wondering, and I love the DPW. I had to do business with them, and I went down, and they were very nice. Today I did a happy dance when they came and collected. I literally ran in the street and did a happy dance when they came and collected my, recyclables. I think they work really hard. But again, I'm going to do a new comparison for everybody. We're going to throw away the bank statement so everybody knows what a bucket looks like, and everyone knows what a colander looks like. So if you pour water in a bucket, it fills up. If you pour water in a colander, it comes out the holes. So I don't understand where we're getting this money from. I just simply don't understand. And I appreciate that you all want to, be nice to the voters and the workers, and I do too. And I do my happy dance. But I'm at a loss to understand how a bunch of very intelligent people continue to pass things that simply do not work, proven on paper they don't work. It just seems ludicrous. It seems crazy. And the fact that I've wasted my evening sitting here and being bullied by some people just shows you how strong I feel about this. I'd rather be home in my jammies, honestly. But I just wanted you to know that, I'm going to rally the troops. I'm going to do everything I can because this isn't working. And I don't know what more proof you need, but it's simply not working. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members of the public?
Council President, members of the council, my fellow brothers and sisters behind me, and the administration on my other side. My name is Walter Hartley. I'm the president of Local 1651. I'm very proud to say that I represent some of the most dedicated employees that the city of Warwick has. We represent the lowest paid workers that we have, but yet we're still just as dedicated that we're there every day, some of us 24/7 when needed. We sat down with the administration, which I have to say we've done since day one with Mayor Picozzi being sworn in. When it came time for negotiations, we sat down with him on both sides. We mutually agreed upon what we presented to you. We think it's a fair share and fair deal on both sides, and I look forward and I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other comments from members of the public? Are there any other comments from members of the public? Okay. Are there any other comments from members of the council who haven't had a chance to speak yet? Any other members? Anybody else from the city council that would like to speak? Councilman Howe.
Mr. President, I move favorable action on PCR 123-21.
Seconded. The Councilman Howe moves it favorable. It's second by Councilman Foley, Councilman McElroy, Councilwoman Travis, Councilman Gephardt. Any additional questions? Hearing none, the clerk will call the roll for favorable action on PCR 123-21.
Mr. McAllister?
Yes.
Mr. Foley?
Yes.
Mr. Gephardt?
Yes.
Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Lattiser?
No.
Mr. McElroy?
Yes.
Mr. Ricks?
No.
Mr. Sinapi? Ms. Travis?
Yes.
7 yes, 2 no, motion passes.
Thank you. PCR 123-21 passes. Councilman Howe, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. President, motion to adjourn.
Second by Councilman Foley and Councilman McElroy. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.